Hello everyone, and welcome to this seminar on left politics and climate change, which is organized to, first and foremost, to get more serious about climate change politics within the political left, and secondly, to mark and celebrate and launch this recent book of ours called Politics of Eco-Socialism, which is published by Routledge and the result of a common Nordic research project, or perhaps a publication project or something in between. And we have 4 editors for the book, out of which 3 are present today, myself, then Johanna sitting in the front, and Rikard Warlenius, who is also giving a presentation today. And the 4th editor, Rikard Warlenius, couldn't unfortunately make it here, but we have other speakers who've been authors of individual chapters of the book. Andreas Ytterstad, who's researcher at the High School of Oslo, is that right?
We tried to become a university, so we call it university.
Something close to a university in Oslo. Yeah. And also Shora Esmailian, who's giving us a presentation via Skype, hopefully, now that we have all the technology functioning here. It wouldn't be 2015 if there wouldn't be the usual hassle with technological issues, but generally we are succeeding here. Now, as a very brief introduction to the book, before I let our guests speak, we started about 2 years ago thinking about this compilation of texts which would somehow address the issues of left and sustainability combined, or more broadly, the issue of red-green or eco-socialist or egalitarian and sustainable society, however you want to put the issue. And we had a few sort of very general starting points to this publication work. First, we wanted to stress that it's a Nordic project. Nordic as a political concept, of course in this era of neoliberalism, is becoming devoid of meaning, but it's not completely devoid of meaning. There's still some remaining idea and identity called the Nordic. And we wanted to emphasize the point that even though there's a lot to criticize about contemporary Nordic societies, and even though the traditional growth model, the traditional welfare model in the Nordics has been based on some very unsustainable practices. And however, despite these, there's some common political idea worth preserving. Just when you dig deep enough, you find the idea worth preserving in these, in what is typically labeled Nordic in politics. Right. So we wanted to recognize that we are all kind of political offspring of this given political model, and wanted to look at what is there worth fighting to preserve, and what parts of this model should be reassessed, rethought as something fundamentally unsustainable. Second, we started from a very Marxist viewpoint, but with elements of Keynesianism and elements of modern ideas of social policy as well. The very kind of grand debate between Marxist and Keynesian was always part of this work, trying to reach these schools of thought which sometimes seem very conflicting with each other within the politics of the left. Whereas Marxist theory tends to focus more on forces of production, concrete capital-labor relations, and Keynesianism more on money stabilizing the economy, increasing in employment, and so on. There seems to be some very common sense, a very common sense intuition that we need something from both these schools of thought to form a concrete, sustainable and egalitarian policy for the future. And so we've somehow tried to build in this dialogue also in this book. Now, then third, we wanted to stress the idea of transformation. The subtitle of the book also says transformed welfare. There's a point of talking about transformations. All too often, there's something of a political dualism visible between those who consider themselves as realistic and those who consider themselves utopian. And it seems that we're all too often stuck within this dualism, forced in thinking that either we have to choose very realistic policies who don't really try to overturn institutions which should be overturned, or that we're stuck within a very utopian thinking which doesn't really give us any political tools for today. And what, at least for me, was really something of a big idea behind this book, was thinking of transformations as a process in which you try to analyze what kind of political tools can you use here and now in the present day very concretely for creating real utopias, not being content with being stuck with contemporary institutions. And so with these three starting points, something of quite an interesting and heterogeneous compilation of articles emerged. We have now I think about 10 articles or 11 articles in this book from different perspectives, including technology, climate jobs, migration, basic income, and so forth. A lot of these individual sub-themes related to the issue. And I have to say I'm quite happy with the outcome. At some point I was expecting worse. And I see Rikard's nodding, implying something of a similar feeling. But anyway, the book is here, and it's published now, and we will continue this event with 3 presentations, as I mentioned, by Rikard, then Andreas, and Shora via Skype. Hopefully we will be establishing the connection, we will, and followed by a panel discussion. Because there will be time in the panel discussion to pose questions to people giving presentations. We haven't reserved time for that right now. So we'll just go on with the presentations without a questions and answers session, and leave time for general discussion afterwards. And everything we say here, to remind you, is streamed online via that camera, and also recorded to be replayed in alternative radio called the Truth Radio next week, is it? Next week in Truth Radio. And the link will be, of course, available to both the stream and the podcasts. Okay, I won't take any more time and give the floor to Rikard.
I hope, can you just help me with this? I have a presentation.
Take it away.
Great. Have to rearrange them there. Okay. Do you hear me? Yeah. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the interesting presentation. It's good to know what we have been doing for the last 2 years. I think you summarized it quite well, actually. And of these three pillars of the study, I think mine is mostly concerned with the transition part, how we go from here to something else. And the focus is on climate change and on renewable energy and the transition from fossil energy to renewable energy, which of course is a central part of this overall transition. And the departure, or the starting point of this little inquiry is, well, the obvious fact that this system, capitalism, or call it what you like, is acting against right now the long-term interest of pretty much anyone, and it's going really bad, and we know that, and it's kind of shocking to actually realize that it is going very bad, and that the ones in power still get away with it, and we let them get away with it. So how is that? How does it come? How can we possibly stop this? That kind of seems to be the most interesting question, or the most important question that we have to address right now. So let's start with looking at how do we usually explain that we have climate change and that nothing very much is done about it. Some will say it's about the human nature, that we started to use fire and the climate change is kind of the end result of that. I think it's quite a stupid explanation, of course, because we, the global society, whatever, have been living without dangerous climate change for tens and thousands of years, and this has been a problem for the last decades. So we just go a bit further, that is not, I think, a serious explanation. Is it about lack of information? Do we not know enough of the risks with climate change? No, that is probably not the case, actually. Most of us know enough to take action, and there are polls, etc., that show that we know enough. We should know enough to know that this is a dangerous situation and to act upon it. But what is really difficult, according to sociologists, etc., is that we tend to ignore it because we don't see how it can influence things. That our contribution seems to be meaningless. So how do we live with that? How do we get on with knowing about this disaster and not doing anything about it? Well, one way would be to make sure, of course, that we are not to blame. We kind of need the support of others to make us believe that and to make us sure of that. So, and Norwegian, half American sociologist Kari-Mari Norgard has called this that we have a kind of a socially organized denial. We know about this, but we convince ourselves commonly that it's beyond our scope of action. I think I have a definition here: the active organization of information about global warming in such a way that it remains outside the sphere of everyday reality, a distant problem rather than a local political issue. And if this is the case, we have a problem, of course, and has that something to do particularly with climate change? Yeah, according to Stephen Gardiner, for instance, a philosopher, he would say that there are climate change represents a kind of a perfect storm, perfect moral storm, which is the coincidence coming together of different factors that amplifies the crisis. And he talks about the global storm, which is the spatial division of causes and effects regarding climate change. So we emit here, like in Scandinavia, but the effects are perhaps happening at the African Horn right now or in Syria. So this is a kind of disincentive for us to act here because of the spatial divisions. And it's also an intergenerational storm, so temporal division, because we emit a lot now, but some of the consequences will happen much later. So that leads to a disincentive for us to act now, and for every generation to actually procrastinate any actions. And then he also talks about the theoretical storm and then the division within science between natural science and social science and so on. So we have a kind of a problem here that makes action on climate change particularly difficult. But still, I would argue that there are examples of such storms that have been transcended historically, and I'm thinking of, for instance, the ozone layer, which was more or less the same due to an agreement in Montreal from 1987, which was quite effective actually in addressing these problems. And it was also a global problem and a generational problem and a theoretical problem. So what's different about climate change then? Well, I think scale is different. Fossil fuels are much more widespread and used than the substance that deplete the ozone layer. And there's also a difference in centrality to the very production system. I mean, fossil fuels is used everywhere, and it's very, you need it almost to have an industrial civilization. While refrigerators, etc., are more that use these substances, freon and so on. They are much more marginal to the economy. And finally, there's the question of technology substitution. Can we do anything? We can't do very much about the scale of fossil fuel. We can't do very much about the centrality of it in capitalist production. But what about technology? Is there? Can we think of technology as helping us out here? That there will emerge a technology that makes it possible to actually stop using fossil fuels without a revolution or something like that in the social sphere. And if you go into that, you will find basically two discourses, which I call the techno-optimist discourse, which I think you read a lot of in the paper right now. There's these record levels now of solar PVs and wind turbines, and we see new electric cars, etc. So it seems like, well, the problems are going to be solved, etc. And if we only let the market rule and support new technology, we're going to fix this. And this discourse then focuses very much on technology substitution, not on, for instance, conservation to reduce the amount of energy needed or something, but new technology. And basically they say, like these two American scientists, that there are barriers to 100% conversions to wind, wave and solar power, but they are not technological, they are not economical, they are social and political. That's the barriers. But then this discourse seldom go any further. They don't problematize these social and political barriers. And then we have the techno-pessimist discourse, which is a bit more marginal perhaps, but I think you heard of it too, that sure, they would say like emissions, there are new solar cells, solar PVs, but they're not very environmentally friendly. They depend on industrial technology, and still the emissions are rising. So this is not really, nothing is changing. It's just like a mirror. It's just like something. In a deep sense, we need a different kind of approaches to actually attack this problem, and they will perhaps then talk of conservation rather than technology substitution, degrowth of energy use or degrowth of the economy, and also even like a collapse, that we need a collapse of the industrial civilization in order to actually solve this problem. So, a problem with this discourse, I would say that it's not really problematizing social and political relations. It imagines that we could transcend this industrial civilization and go to some kind of degrowth without creating much of social tensions and so on. So perhaps there is a room for a kind of third standpoint that would be rather optimistic about technology, but pessimist about capitalism's ability to actually provide this global society with the right technology and to disseminate it at the scale that is necessary. That's what I try to elaborate on in this text. So if we take this question serious, what are the social and political barriers of actually creating a 100% system of renewable energy? Not just stop at the questions, kind of. So, of course, there are these problems that I was talking about, the perfect storms, and the fact that people tend to perhaps deny that they have an influence on this. And another problem, of course, is vested interest and the fossil capital who have invested billions and billions in production of oil and gas and so on. And they have their business models and they will fight till as much as they can and do already and have done for many, many years to stop any renewable transition to renewable energy. But I would also say that there is something else. And I tried then to identify 4 barriers that are more like internal to how capitalism and how capitalistic economy works. And I've lost time, but I have a few minutes, I think. And one I call the Lauderdale paradox, which is actually early 19th century political economist in England, James Maitland of Lauderdale, who wrote on the difference between public wealth and private riches, and noted that while public wealth can exist in abundance, air, fresh water, etc., in order to create private wealth, you have to have something that exists in scarcity, right? You can't make money from anything that is abundant. And Foster calls this that there's nothing more dangerous to capitalism as a system than abundance. And if we look at today's energy system, we can see that they are dependent on input of scarce resources like oil, gas, coal, uranium in the case of nuclear power. And these are stock fuel energy that is extracted, they are commodified, they are sold and transported around the world, and there's a long chain of people making profits in this chain. But while we look at most forms of renewable energies, they are flowing from abundant resources. They are using wind, they are using water in seas or streaming water, they are using sun, which are more or less abundant resources, and which are then difficult to enclose and to commodify and to profit from. So a renewable energy system would cut out at least some of the profits that are made now from fossil fuels, and it could perhaps deliver as much public wealth, as much energy for people, but not as much private riches. So that might be a barrier that is identified by the energy utility companies, and which would like kind of raise the resistance against this kind of shift. A second barrier is called here the attraction of spatio-temporal fixes, and it goes back to the research of Andreas Malm on the transition to steam power, and actually the transition from renewable energy to fossil energy in the 19th century, and he is also one of the authors in this compilation of in this book, but on another team. He's a colleague of mine at Lund University. So he could see that this past transition from dependence in the British textile industry on dependence on water and partly wind, was not about really costs or that the steam power became cheaper than using water in the textile industry, but rather was about control over labor supply and control over energy supply, because the waterfalls that they were using before, they were free of use, but they were unreliable. They were dependent on, you know, how much had it been raining and the level of water in the magazines and so on. And also the labor force, which was the large reservoir of labor was within the cities, and the waterfalls was generally out in the countryside. So in order to get the labor force to these places where the energy conditions would be, perhaps you had to pay better, you couldn't rely on abundance of labor that would put a downward pressure on wages and so on. So he talks about the need for of capital, of abstract space to be independent on the whimsical nature and rain and other seasons and so on, and to be able to control the inflow of energy. And that was the main advantage of fossil fuels. Actually, you stock it in a barrel and put it to use whenever you like. You can put it on, you can put it off. And also abstract time. Capitalism relies on abstract time. This kind of turn to abstract space and abstract time is now a generalized pattern. Globalization, as we know it, of course, is about finding the best places of production, mostly where labor is cheapest, and there is a precondition that we don't speak of very much, that to be able to put production in China, for instance, you need stock fuels that is transportable anywhere. If you didn't have that, if you were, for instance, relying on renewable energy would have perhaps had the lowest price in Sahara, where there's a lot of sun but no labor. So this is actually also a kind of barrier, can be a barrier for a shift to a renewable energy system for capitalism. The third barrier that I discuss is the fear of decentralization, right? And because that's a problem that we tend to hear that the advocates of renewable energy, they emphasize that this is much more decentralized system. It's better for a lot of reasons. Not only that it produces clean energy, it also breaks down all hierarchies and big fossil fuel companies, etc. But I mean, that's good from their perspective, but it's bad for capitalism, right? It's bad for monopoly capital, who are used to control the chain of production in huge corporations. So they realized already in the 50s, I think, the US Senate decided not to go for solar, but rather to invest in nuclear power, because they saw this as a potential imperial tool. They could control the flows of energy. And with solar power, it's much easier technology that could be set up by almost anyone anywhere. And if you want monopolized control, that's not very good. It's like a horror. And finally, my fourth barrier is not so much actually about capitalism and how it works per se, but the fact that the biggest challenge to this system ever is occurring at a specific time in human history when we are particularly unable to deal with it due to this neoliberal phase of capitalism with its disarmament of institution of regulatory power. And this is one of the points that is made by Naomi Klein in her book, This Changed Everything. That we're right in this crisis tend to happen at the wrong moment of time. because just 30 or 40 years ago, during what is sometimes called Fordism, states were more relying on top-down regulation. They had these Keynesian ideas of economics, and they had stronger tax regimes and so on, while now most of these systems are deregulated, and the state has weakened, and what is always emphasized is market allocation and commodification, and that seemed to be not very effective means or policies in this transition. And you can actually see that I mentioned before the problems with the ozone layer and the Montreal Agreement from 1987, which was pre or semi-neoliberal perhaps. It didn't only apply market regulation and market systems, but more, tougher regulation. You should phase that out, and you should use that instead. And actually it seemed to have been more effective in reducing emissions of greenhouse gases than the Kyoto Protocol that was specifically set up to target these emissions of greenhouse gases, but applied another set of policies which was much more market regulated and so on. Finally, I also tried to kind of turn this picture around and see that none of these barriers that I'm discussing are necessarily insurmountable, and they might be some kind of global green neo-Fordist regulation, and we discussed that also in the book, and that can probably be done without threatening capital accumulation as such, but it's interesting to see these barriers. How would they confront another kind of system that is more of a socialist system? And then this Lauderdale paradox, that should be reversed. That would not be a barrier, but reversed into an enticement. Because then energy abundance would of course be an advantage. If the aim is the general good, the fact that much of the energy is free, that's an advantage, not a barrier. And if we look over this spatio-temporal fixes, we can see that any definition of socialism would include some kind of labor control over the means of production or labor influence, and that would be facilitated by a socialist system to have a particular place and a particular workforce dealing with these problems. So it wouldn't be a barrier either. And of course, decentralization could also be harbored much more better by a socialist system than by capitalism. So long Marx quote if I'm running out of time, but in a way it seems like this centralized, monopolized capitalism is becoming a feather upon the mode of production, the development toward a more decentralized renewable energy system. And some of you would perhaps recognize a quote by Marx that ends with the centralization of the means of production and socialization of labor at last reach a point where they become incompatible with their capitalist integument, and this integument is burst asunder. The knell of capitalist property sounds, the expropriators are expropriated. It actually fits rather good into this. So, by just summing up, by pointing out and explaining this, the capitalist and other barriers in operation here, I think the political inaction might appear as less irrational and understandable, and to point this out would actually perhaps be a first step toward the dissolution of what Kari Marie Norgard calls this socially organized denial, and actually create would encourage involvement for political change rather than to be paralyzed by this the picture of that you can't really do anything. At least that's what I hope. So when resistance is seen as meaningful and as potentially influential, then probably mass political action will occur more easily. And whether it leads to socialism or if socialism is even necessary for successfully dealing with climate change, that's beyond what we could know, of course. But I think this would lead to would be a struggle towards a more social, inclusive kind of society, whatever we would label it. It's another question. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rikard. So next we have Andreas Ytterstad, who's not using a PowerPoint. Just making sure, do we have the connection now?
Yeah, is it okay if I call Shora now so she can...
Yeah, yes, she can also listen to your presentation, but she knows that she gets online. You take your third hand to grab this.
Exactly.
So there is no talk of Andreas Ytterstad, and you can listen to it. I will leave you in the background.
Thank you. Off my microphone then.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I thought I'd say a couple of words about myself before I begin. My name is Andreas Ytterstad. I'm a socialist, I'm a Marxist. I agree very much with the last quote from Marx and so on. But I'm going to talk about my chapter pretty much in the capacity that I've written it. And I'm also the deputy leader of something called the Concerned Scientists Norway, which is an organization of around 200 people who is part of an organization because it's concerned about climate change. And that concern really, really overwhelms me. Richard was talking about the perfect moral storm. I don't know, I haven't read the news this morning, but the perfect hurricane apparently hit Mexico last night, showing that the urgency of what we're talking about is very, very fundamental. And I want to stress that from the very outset here, because I'm very happy to be invited here, both because it's a left forum and it's a discussion among socialists, but also because Teppo tells me that there are people here who knows about the climate movement in Finland. I'm very interested in listening to what you're doing. I don't know how things are in Finland, but I can tell you in Norway there's momentum building. There's momentum building to the Paris summit that is coming up now in November and December. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to talk about the chapter in my book, but I'm going to talk a little bit around it. Also because my chapter is really a taking note of a developing climate movement in Norway and internationally. So I'm happy to answer questions, on more on the chapter, but I want to do this also as a kind of a build-up to the dialogue that we're going to have afterwards with Rikard and with all you guys here as well. Just to give you an idea of the momentum and the task ahead. Last week, the biggest single paper in Norway, called Aftenposten, held its own climate conference. In itself, an unprecedented thing. I think Aftenbladet had done the same thing in Sweden. At least there was an idea picked up from Aftenbladet. But anyway, 1,400 people appeared in a theater in Oslo. We had James Hansen, the world's most famous climate scientist there. We had Cristina Figueras, the UN climate chief, leading the negotiations of the Paris there, and ministers and polar expeditionists and bloggers and everybody. It was a big thing. And Cristina Figueras, who is the climate negotiation boss, she said that, well, I am the daughter of a revolutionary, so I'm not afraid at all of the word revolution. And there's no doubt that there is a need for a revolution in order to avert climate change. And I think this has to be a starting point. I mean, go to any airport, big airport in the world, and I dare you not to find a commercial talking about revolution. So the idea of revolution and the word of revolution is oftentimes used. And remember the statistics here. Global emissions are going up on the yearly basis by something like 3%. They need to come down by 3% annually. And in the rich countries like Norway, Finland, they need to go down between 5 and 10%. And it needs to be very, very rapidly. So just to bend those curves is completely natural to talk about revolution. You have to bend the curves, and it's a revolution. But the strange thing about what Cristina Figueres was talking about when she mentioned revolution, the thought revolution, that this revolution probably is the first revolution in human history where people are not mentioned at all. Where there's no attempt, and this is my biggest frustration as a concerned scientist. We have this overwhelming challenge, and we have this overwhelming talk of our biggest challenge. And we even have the talk of revolution. But there's no strategy. There's not even an attempt to involve people in that revolution. I mean, we had revolution, the French Revolution, we had loads of revolutions, and we remember them from people being involved. But what is the revolution that we're talking about now? It's either a technical revolution, it's a revolution of entrepreneurship, but it never seems to involve people. And that's a big worry for me. But it's a good thing that it's a mobilization going on. And I think one of the key challenges that we face is to distinguish between the momentum building from above. I mean, Obama is talking about climate change, all the state leaders. I'm sure in Finland here as well, you will have people talking in big words about climate change. But what is really happening in the build-up to Paris? I attended, together with representatives of Norwegian civil society, the Norwegian negotiation delegation for Paris last Friday. It was a kind of meeting about this size, experts, really good negotiators. If there was a world championships in negotiating, Norway would be very good. They were very, very good negotiators. They know all about the mission, they know all about processes. And also, experts in civil society, Friends of the Earth, the trade unions were there, the bosses organizations was there. And what was the message coming from the Norwegian negotiating team? Well, for the first time, it's like more than 150 countries of the world have pledged emission cuts for the upcoming Paris. And it was put forward as a big, big step forward. And what did those pledges amount to? And remember, these are just voluntary pledges. There's absolutely no compliance regime. There's no sanctions. There's no airstrikes on countries not complying with climate change regimes. Canada pulled out of Kyoto, nothing happened. So, but even given those voluntary emissions, what does it amount to? Well, there's a report apparently coming up in the next couple of weeks which is going to give the exact number. But what they've pledged so far is a world between 2.7 degrees warmer and 2.9 degrees warmer than we have at the moment. And the message from the Norwegian negotiation team was, this is good. Of course, if you're going to preserve the 2-degree target, then you can just write your press release immediately because it's bad. But if you look at it from the perspective of a negotiation process going forward, this is a big, big step forward. Basically, we were being asked as civil society to celebrate the baby steps of diplomacy rather than the complete failure of meeting this climate change challenge. So in this context, for me, it's very important to say that one of Marx's quotes that really rings to mind, and it's probably borrowed from Hegel, it is not enough with the power of argument. You need the argument of power as well. I'm sure within the next decade or two, there's going to be a whole number of people after we really screwed things up who said, I told you so, I had the right arguments on paper all along. Bloggers, scientists, politicians. They're all going to tell us. And I'm not joking about this. In the book that I participated in, there's some really, really good ideas. Some of the best ideas of what we could do comes from the political left. So this book is a very good one. All of the chapters, I think, fit very much into that. But I think we're faced with the challenge of everybody seeing, can we make those powerful ideas relate to some kind of social and political power that can make that transformation happen? And that's why I think the important question to ask is not how much are we going to cut emissions, but really what sort of ideas have the potential to move masses and masses of people to make the transformation happen. And that is, to me, part of the answer to that is the idea of climate jobs. Now, climate jobs is also just an argument. It's like any argument. So here's the argument first. The argument is, one of the most powerful defenses that our rulers have today is to say that we cannot take care of the future because there are more pressing needs now. And among those pressing needs is obviously, food, the basic stuff we need, but most of all, jobs. Because jobs in the capitalist system is how we can pay for our food, how we can pay for our housing. And in austerity-ridden, Europe and in many other parts of the country, part of the world, people will not choose the global climate above their job, their interest right now. So the idea of climate jobs is to fight for those jobs that gets emissions down. That's the simplicity of it. In order to get emissions down by 80% or 90% in the next 15 to 20 years, we need millions and millions of jobs all across the world. In renewable energy, in housing, in transport, obviously in agriculture and other areas as well, but majorly those three areas: renewable energy, transport, and housing. And we need to fight for those jobs. And if we can fight for good, solid jobs that at the same time contribute to do something about climate change, then that might be a good argument that also connects to power. So I want to tell you a little bit about how things have developed in Norway, because I think that although you might argue it's still just an argument, more or less appealing, you might like it. I guess in this room you like it, But the great and interesting thing in Norway is that it has begun to have a certain power. Not power in the sense that would actually change much. I must admit that straight away. But power in the sense that it has begun to be taken aboard by many different groups in society. So, what happened in Norway? In 2013, I wrote a book called 100,000 Climate Jobs. And that book was not just my book. It was endorsed by 3 national unions, most of the environmental organizations in Norway, and the Norwegian church. And we now talk about the trinity of church organizations, environmental organizations, and a growing portion of labor unions. In the latest book, called Bridge to the Future, which I edited, which came out now in August, with 17 chapters, there's chapters by 4 leaders of national trade union leaders, there's bishops participating, there's Sharon Burrow, who's the leader of the International Trade Union Confederation, representing 176 million workers outside. It's written the first chapter in the book. There's chapters on jobs in agriculture and fishing and so on. That campaign for 100,000 climate jobs, only the day before yesterday, Greenpeace Norway launched its campaign up to Paris for 100,000 new green jobs as their campaign. This fall, there's something called the Norwegian Organization for Children and for Youth and Children Organization, called LNU. There's 90 organizations, most of the voluntary NGOs participating. They have one campaign to step into the new renewable age, and it's called the Fight for Climate Jobs. Afterwards, if you have time, I can show you the website of Rotterdam. You'll see they made videos. They made this phony environmental and knowledge minister interviewing me and other people for the jobs necessary. But it's basically also 100,000 climate jobs put at the forefront. Now, the climate jobs issue is not the only issue. And we've had 2 national conferences in Norway. First, in 2014, we were 350 people. Then in 2015, this year, we were more than 500 people in the trade union main locale in Oslo. We also include issues like climate justice, and the fact that we've kind of become a trinity, we're trying to get some of the peasant organizations with us as well, means that we take aboard other issues. We try to be inclusive. So we have climate jobs, and this is my interpretation. Climate jobs, the demand for 100,000 new climate jobs in Norway is speaking of Naomi Klein, is the leap. That's the leap demand. In Naomi Klein's book, it's structured around the idea of leap years. We had just a few years left in order to make those big leaps that can get emissions down. And the demand for 100,000 climate jobs is, in the Norwegian case, a leap demand. But it needs to build and build on other things as well. The fight for a just transition within the trade union movement has been going on for many years, and that's something that we've included much more. The need to green existing workplaces, to make it more environmentally friendly, is also something that we need to be including. And we need to include the North-South perspective, because people in the global South, like in Mexico, are suffering much, much more out of climate change than we do. So we need to include those things, but we have to put this demand that we have these jobs that bring emissions down as a focal point. And I think it has been a pretty good start that we've had. Theoretically, I think you can speak of this as Marx and Keynes in the same campaign. And it's, in that sense, it's very much in the spirit of the book that we're publishing here. Because what does it mean to create 100,000 climate jobs? Well, for the free marketeers and for the neoliberals, they say, come on, you can't just say that you're going to have 100,000 climate jobs. You're going to have to let the market create those jobs. You're going to leave that for the dynamism and the flexibility and the entrepreneurship of the market. But both Keynesians and Marxists, social democrats and socialists, or anybody who understands the enormity of climate change, understands that you cannot leave climate change to the market. Wasn't it, in fact, Nicholas Stern, back in 2006, who called climate change the biggest market failure in history? So we cannot no longer trust those people who say, well, the king is dead, long live the king. The market didn't work, so what we'll do, we have no more market. We have to mobilize for political intervention into the economy. And that's obviously what unites social democrats and socialists, Keynesians and Marxists. And then we can have a discussion about how to go about it, how radical that transformation is, but that is the selling point. So one of the chapters in our latest book is an interview with Mariana Mazzucato, one of the leading economists of the world, arguing precisely that real innovation in this world, the internet, things like that, did not happen just through market entrepreneurship. It happened through massive state intervention. So that's the kind of, those 100,000 jobs, we demand that of the government. It's not something that we say that, well, a few stimulus and a few green certificates and the market would take away. No, we need to have something. Okay. Does this mean that we're winning? Not at all. I've just said that the argument has gained some territory. How is that visible? Well, we had a municipal election just this couple of months ago, where the Green Party in Norway made the biggest breakthrough, and there was also a shift to the left, both the radical left and the social democratic left at the same time. One of the key debates in the Norwegian election campaign, together with the refugee crisis, which Shora is going to talk about in the next session, was the idea of a green shift. That we have to shift Norway. Why? Because oil prices are very low in Norway at the moment. So Norway, that up until just 6 months ago, was fairly insulated from the crisis that is stricken the rest of Europe, the unemployment and the austerity of the rest of Europe, is now beginning to have the bite. You know, there are thousands of people in the oil industry have lost their jobs in Norway just over the last couple of months. So the idea that you have to transform, you have to transition, you have to have a green shift has hit the national agenda. And I think some of it is due to our campaign, to be honest. But, and there's a big, big but, the debate about the green shift in Norway at the moment is just about new jobs being created alongside of the fossil fuel industry. There's still no attempt at all to plan for an organized descent of Norwegian oil and gas. On the contrary, only this year, the parliament said that we're going to drill for oil in the Arctic. And in the Arctic is the last place on Earth, if you want to have any chance of avoiding the worst cases of climate change, to open up for drilling in the Arctic is the last place. There was a big article in Nature earlier this year that said that for scientific reasons, for ethical reasons, for economic reasons even, you do not drill in the Arctic. Well, the Norwegian government has decided they are going to drill. They're going to use billions and billions of Norwegian kroners, and they're going to subsidize the oil industry to search for more oil and gas in it. So therefore, it has been very important for the Norwegian campaign to combine the demand for 100,000 new climate jobs with the demand that says put a brake on Norwegian oil. And that's what we're trying to do. We're having plans further. Okay. Does this amount to a power, something that we're going to have? Well, not on its own, but we have to think about the ideas that we discuss in this meeting within the context in which we're living, in what has happened the last year. In September 2014, between 300 and 400,000 people demonstrated in New York, the biggest climate change demonstration, People's Climate March in history. That People's Climate March is coming up on the 28th of November this year as well. In Paris, across the world, the People's Climate March. I know there's one in Oslo. Have you noticed what has been the slogans of those big demonstrations this year? In Toronto, in July, there was a big demonstration of 20,000 people. What was the slogan of that? Jobs and justice. The 28th of November in Norway has two main items: climate jobs, climate justice. In the last year, all religious leaders of the planet, the Pope, Muslim clerics, Dalai Lama, and only 3 days ago, 154 religious leaders across the world made a common statement saying that we need to put the globe below 2% degrees. Not 2.7, not 2.7, between 1.5 and 2 degrees. Only in France on Thursday, I think there was 100 media stories on that declaration by the clerics from across the world. The International Trade Union Confederation, which I mentioned Sharon Barrow has written a chapter, they have hosted a conference in the middle of September with the French foreign minister in Paris, 200 delegates, unionists from across the world. I don't know if there were people from Finland. I know there were people from both Sweden and Denmark and Norway. And the idea of climate jobs is coming up there. It's not official yet, but there's a kind of how can I put it? I have a certain hope that I'll be able to speak on the official World of Work Pavilion of the International Trade Union Confederation in Paris on the 3rd and 4th of December this year. Because I think that the idea of climate jobs, only last week there was beginning in Portugal of a similar campaign, it has been picking up steam and it's being half recognized as something that is very important, even of the most important trade union confederation existing. So I think what Naomi Klein wrote in her last book, the last chapter, how many of you have read Naomi Klein's book? I'm not asking as a kind of teacher thing, but just out of curiosity. Well, there's a couple of people. Well, the last chapter, how does it end? It ends by a climate modeler going through the different possibilities of averting the worst possibilities of climate change. And that model says that the only geophysical force that can change things soon enough is mass movements. Mass movements. And with those clerics, with the International Trade Union Confederation, with those 300,000 and 400,000 people demonstrating in New York last year, and with the upcoming things now, I think we have to place our ideas within that growing movement. And I want to end, because we're going to have a discussion, by saying that, well, all of this is very grand, and I think it can be even bigger. I think that when that idea catches up, when people go on strike for jobs and for the planet at the same time, when they start occupying factories for jobs and for the planet for the same time, and when we get the first victories out of this movement, these slogans of jobs, of justice that we're seeing in Toronto, that we're going to see in Paris coming up now, you know, it will light a fuse, and it'll inspire people everywhere. But those grand things start with individuals. There's a Swedish researcher called Nora Ratzen who has actually a research project on this. She has gone through where have trade unions started to pick up the question of climate change, from Spain to other countries. And it's often singular shop stewards, single representatives approached by either academics or by leftist people, coming, talking, how can we do something? How can we start something here? And they've started to roll the ball. Because let's face it, many trade unions across the world, I bet in Finland as well, feel that they have their backs against the wall and they have enough fighting for their pensions, for their salaries, for the kind of regular stuff that trade unions do. But in this day and age, I think there's a possibility that you could get some trade unions aboard. And if you could build the beginnings of alliances, like that we have with the Bridge to the Future Alliance in Norway, I think we could start to make powerful arguments seem like they have power. And when they do seem to have power, we will feel less depressed, we will be less kind of, you know, organizing our own denial in our head about what's going on, because we see there's something that I can do as part of a collective to make sure that this planet is habitable and a good place to be for generations and generations and generations and generations to come.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And now we have our third speaker, Shora, who's been online all the time. And so Shora contributed a chapter to the book on climate refugees, which is a very timely topic. And I'm sure it's of great interest to the whole audience. Now, Shora, you have about 20 minutes to present your ideas. I'm sorry we have some technical issues here, and for that reason you won't be able to see the audience. I hope that's not too difficult, but surely the audience can see you. You're on a very big screen in this room right now. Okay, please.
So hi. Oh no, I can hear myself. So, can you see this map?
No.
Sorry. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I don't know if you can just turn off my voice because I keep hearing. Can you turn off the microphone? And then I won't hear you, but. Please just nod if you can see this map.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before you leave the screen, okay, good, great. So, thank you for the invitation. And as you said, climate refugees is a very a topic everybody's talking about. And I wrote a book on climate refugees that came out 3 years ago, and I started by going to 3 different countries, to Pakistan, to Egypt, and to Kenya, just to see if there would be any climate refugees. And because I thought climate refugees is something that maybe my children or my grandchildren would see. But as we've seen now, And as a lot of people coming from Syria, we can see that climate refugees is a fact today in our world. So I just wanted to give you a small picture of how a climate refugee can look like or who it is. So here is Pakistan, and I went to different parts of the country after the big floods in 2010, when 1/5 of the country was underwater and 20 million people fled. So we're just going to go to the Swat Valley. Maybe a lot of people think about the Taliban when you say Swat Valley, and yes, they were very active there. And that is where I met Aisha. It looked like this. I came to a small village in the Swat Valley, and people had started to build up their homes again. So they fled 2 kilometers up to the mountain, and they used to live in tents, and then they started to build up their houses. So here's what a house could look like. So you have an outdoor place where they have their woods and stuff, and then you have one room for a whole family. And a lot of women there, they were too scared to talk to me, but Aisha, she wanted to tell me what happened that day when the floods came. And what Aisha told me that was interesting, that she and her family had fled their home several times because of the fighting between the Taliban and the Pakistan military, but this time they had to flee forever because the house that they used to live in and that they built up, it didn't exist anymore. And Aisha, she was around 30, and she was a seamstress. Now her brother that she used to live with and his family, he went around different cities to try to find work day by day to save up money to maybe be able to build a house again. And I said, so if you have saved up money, can you build a house where you used to live? And she said, no, because the land that the house were on, it's gone. And I couldn't understand, what did she mean by the land is gone? So we actually went to the village. Sorry, I have to do like this so I can see the clock. So we actually went to the village where she came from, and she pointed out, over there by the trees was where her house used to be at. And this is the Swat River, and when the floods came, it took everything with it, not only land, but also houses and belongings to people. And this is called a landslide. So when we look back into the village, it looked like this. So what happened in Pakistan was that this year, 2010, and the following year, also 2011, the monsoon rains were much more than usual. And monsoon rains is something people actually need to survive. They have their lives according to monsoon rain. But when we have warmer temperatures in the atmosphere, then we have warmer seas. And when we have warmer seas, then the vapor is much more. So for every degree that is warmer in the atmosphere, we have 7% more vapor in the air. So when we have more vapor, then we have more clouds, and then we have heavier rains. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into this specifically, but that is the big picture. So 2010 was the year that 1/5 of Pakistan were underwater. 20 million people fled, most of them within the region, within even the small region. Like, for example, Aisha, she left for maybe 2-3 kilometers, but she couldn't go back home to her own village. But 2010 was also one of the most extreme years and one of the warmest years on record until now. So you can say Aisha is a climate refugee. Then I went to Kenya, and during the summer of 2011, one of the worst droughts in 60 years hit the whole Horn of Africa, and a lot of people from Somalia and Ethiopia walked actually into Kenya and to the different slums around Nairobi. So there I met some people. So this is what it can look like in a slum area. Here's garbage from a place close by this slum where rich people live, and they don't want their garbage, so they put them here in the slum. So it's very not so fancy houses, as you can see. And there I met Fatuma, and she used to be from a village here in Mandera, very close to Somalia and Ethiopia. And she was a pastoralist. She and her husband, they had some animals and livestock that they lived on. And they felt during this last drought that this was the worst drought ever. Because the rain patterns that we have here in Horn of Africa is that you have the short rains in December, January, and then you have a drought, and then you have the long rains maybe between May and July, August, and then you have drought again. So this is also a circle and cycle that people, especially pastoralists, know, and they know how to handle it, and they know that, okay, maybe if one rain doesn't come, or two, we still know how to find water, and so on. But what the problem was for Fatuma and many other people during 2011 drought is that it hadn't rained between 3 and 5 years in a lot of places in Horn of Africa. So for 5 years, Fatuma didn't see good rains here in Mandera. So when this last drought came and almost all their livestock died, she and her husband felt that no, we cannot live here anymore. She didn't want her children to starve. So they moved to this slum area called Korogocho outside Nairobi. And this is how she lived now, in a small room. And she felt that home was much better. There she had her mother and her sisters and people that could help out. She felt alone here. Here they had to pay for rent, they had to pay for water, which they didn't have to do in their village. But then when the drought came, she and her sisters and mother had to go even further to get water. And so it was very double for her. She longed home, but she also thought that here my husband can work and our children can at least eat some meals every day. So these are just 2 examples of who is a climate refugee today. But how can you say that these people are climate refugees? Didn't they just flee because they were poor? And usually I use a picture of a wounded soldier, because the word in English, vulnerability, it comes from the Latin vulnerabilis, and vulnerabilis was what the Romans called a wounded soldier. So when you have a wounded soldier and you have a non-wounded soldier and an attack comes, the one that will make it, most probably, is the non-wounded soldier. And that's exactly what's happening to our planet. We have a planet where we have extreme weathers coming more and more often, and there are already some people that are wounded because they live in the global south, because they are poor, because they are women, or because they are old, or because they are sick. So all these different components make them wounded when a big extreme weather event comes, for example, a drought or a flood. So if we look at some statistics, 70% of all the people that live below the poverty line are women. So it means that they are much more vulnerable to this sort of events. Or the people that you met, Aisha and Fatuma, they are directly dependent on what the land can give. They are farmers or they are pastoralists. So, for example, during 2010, there was a big drought also in Russia, and the price of wheat went up. We here, I suppose I cannot see you, but we can still have this buffer that we can pay some more kroners or euros and get the flour, but a bit more expensive. But people that are directly dependent on what the land or the sea gives them, they feel these changes in climate so much more than we do. So, and they are much more vulnerable. So when Fatuma and her husband lost all their livestock, they had nothing left, so they had to move. They had to go to Nairobi. They had to migrate. And what we're seeing today with the big refugee crisis in Syria, not a lot of people wanted to talk about this some years ago, but between 2006 and 2011 was the worst drought in many years in Syria. And actually, 2009, the American embassy in Damascus wrote to the White House, and this was leaked with the WikiLeaks document, saying that there is a really big drought in Al Jazeera region, and we're warning for this because a lot of people are moving into the cities. And actually, just before the start of the Syrian revolution, 2011, 1.5 million farmers couldn't live on their land anymore and had to move into the cities. And that puts a lot of pressure on the society, of course. So climate change definitely has made a big contribution to the conflict that we see in Syria and to the big refugee crisis that we see. So amongst people that are coming here now, or even people that are, millions of people that are living in refugee camps in Turkey or in Lebanon or in Jordan, a lot of them are actually climate refugees today. But the thing is that according to international law, we don't have a definition of climate refugees. If you are going to be a refugee today, you have to talk about the Geneva Convention from 1951. So it's very old, and it says that you are a refugee if you're barred from returning to your home country due to fear of persecution on the grounds of ethnicity, religion, nationality, or political beliefs. So it doesn't have to do anything with climate. But within academia, there are a lot of researchers talking about climate refugees and how important it is to have a definition. Because if we don't have a legal definition of climate refugees, then they don't have any rights. And one of the best definitions that I found when I was working on my book was from Frank Bielman and Ingrid Boas, and they're migration researchers. And their definition is that climate refugees are people who have to leave their habitats immediately or in the near future because of sudden or gradual alteration in their natural and environmental related to at least one of three impacts of climate change: sea level rise, extreme weather events, and drought and water scarcity. Now I didn't talk here about Egypt, but I also met a lot of farmers in Egypt that have the problem with sea level rise, and where the next generation is not able is not going to be able to live on that land. So this definition makes also people that aren't crossing borders refugees. Because today you are a refugee only if you cross a border. But as a lot of research tells us, is that when you flee, you most probably flee within your country. You flee very, very close to home. One, because you don't have any resources. If you want to come from Syria to Sweden, you have to have a lot of resources. You have to have a lot of money. but also because a lot of people want to return back to where they came from. They have their networks, their jobs, their history, their roots, everything from where they had to flee. So people that are fleeing internally displaced people that UN calls them, they are not refugees and they don't have the same rights. So, but no, I don't think that suddenly there will be this refugee revolution where the Western countries will open the border just if we have a legal definition. But if we have a legal definition, and this is why we don't have a legal definition until now, when we have a legal definition, then the Western countries or the rich nation, northern part of the globe, has to say that yes, this is a debt that we have to you. We caused climate change, and we are going to give you your rights. Unfortunately, there is not much hope when it comes to the negotiations. Just a week ago, the recent draft that was written for Paris took away climate refugee part totally, because Australia is not going to accept any mentioning of climate refugee. And a lot of small island nations around New Zealand and Australia is actually asking Australia and New Zealand, can you open your countries for us when our countries are lying underwater? And both New Zealand and Australia said, totally no, we are not going to welcome you. And they are also the ones that are stopping all negotiations around the climate refugee issue. But if we are going to, I think the situation is very different from Sweden and Finland. Sweden took in a lot of refugees. I met a lot of refugees that are going to Finland because they heard that Finland is giving asylum much more than Sweden will do in the future. So there are all these rumors going around. But as a left movement that is working for refugees' rights, we also need to talk much more about climate refugees. Because when we talk about climate refugees, what the solution is to actually open our borders. That is one of the ways to pay back our debt to the global south. They didn't do anything to create climate change. Our countries did. So it is going to be challenging to adapt to climate change, but one way to adapt is to actually let people that want to come to safer ground to actually do it. So it's very important when we talk about adaptation to climate change and about actual humans that are going to be affected by climate change and the global warming, that they need protection and they have to come here. This is really a bit strange, I'm just talking. I don't know the time really, I cannot hear you because the microphone is off. So maybe someone can come forward. I think I talked for 15 minutes.
Yeah. You can use 2-3 minutes more if you like.
Sorry.
Okay.
The microphone is off.
Yes, you can use 2 or 3 more minutes if you like. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to be in Paris. Unfortunately, these issues are not going to be on the negotiating table. But I think that because of what's happening now, a lot of people are coming. There is a momentum to talk about refugees, and now also is the time to actually start talking about climate refugees. When my book was released in Sweden 3 years ago, nobody talked about climate refugees. Suddenly now, this year, this autumn, there is something called Musiikkisalissa and Music Help. They make young people to contribute to some some cause. And the cause this year will be climate refugees. So finally people are start talking about climate refugees, at least here in Sweden. But the last thing I want to say, and how important it is, besides talking about climate refugees and actually pushing for open borders and non-militarized borders in Europe and in the US, is that we have to first and foremost work for stopping the emissions. Because if we stop the emissions, then we will actually not create more climate refugees. People won't have to leave their homes because of the effects of global warming. So there are those two things that we really have to work side by side. And I think I really like what Andreas was talking about. Climate jobs is so important, and that actually can kind of go hand in hand. We talk about climate refugees. For a lot of parties in the West are saying, oh no, people cannot come and take our jobs and so on and so on and so forth. But if we actually have to create more jobs to try to put down the emissions, then we actually need people coming to help us do something about the Western economy.
You just missed hearing the audience clapping. But thank you very much. I know it must be a bit awkward to talk through this video connection, but your presentation was excellent. Thank you very much for that again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, now we'll take a 15-minute break, and after that continue with the discussion and more interactive part.
And if you want to buy the book, we are talking about
Thank you, bye, good luck.
Eli jos haluatte ostaa kirjaa 15 € hintaan, niin se onnistuu tässä yhteydessä käteisellä, kiitos. Tämähän meni suipasti. Nyt se viedään valikoita. Paitsi ehkä vähän. Joo, kiitos. Mitenkäs laitettaisiin nämä paneelia varten?
Niin, on pitäisi jotain tuoleja.
Voitaisiin varmaan ottaa nuo etureivin tuolet. Siinä on niin 4 puhujaa sitten.
Mä äsken rädittelin tästä.
Joo, että jos tehdään silleen, että jos sä tulet vaikka tuohon seuraamaan, niin
joo.
mä sanon mun tiedostoneen, mitä lakata, jos sitä tarvitsisi johon. Joo, se mä olin kanssa jotenkin silleen ihmeessä, koska se oli jotenkin ehkä se ei kiinni. Jos se asiakaspalvelu ei sitten ollut se tyyppi, kekä oikeasti näitä hoitaa. Olen vähän ihmeessä. Ei se varmaan aikaisesta perusteessa, kun se tulee sieltä. Se on niin kuin kova ja... Siis kyllä mä ajattelen, että tosiaan ne tulee sitten sanomaan, että ne kuitenkin on...
Sä pisit tuon esteen päälle, kun se valmitaan, se nauhaa.
Se on tässä näitä kaupunkilaitoksessa.
Se tulee tuossa ottaa se esteen pois.
Joo, okei. Joo, hänelle
Piste. Sehän on nyt kaksi. Hyvä, joo. Tänne oikein kahvi. Paksaa sitten nyt sitten Facebookiin. Tässä on kahvi tai voitko lähteä sun vaan pois käydään.
Joo, mä paan ihan just.
Videokameralla.
Elina combination of both. Yeah, so it's more good. Okay, I think we are. It's not very small. But yeah. But 6 o'clock is for sure. If we are on time with we have to leave because I.
Mutta jossain sitä ei saa sen striimin tosiaan yhteen paikkaan ja se on sitten katsottu, että se kattaa sen koko kuljetuslaitteen siinä haamuudessa. Että ei tarvitse koko ajan kääntää. Niin silloin se toimii, että sitten voi kiva tallentaa viimeistä katsoa joku hetkeksi, niin se toimii vakavalla tallenteessa käsin. Mutta sitä, jos sen onnistuu jatkamaan, jos jossain toisen mukaan tulee sellainen tilasto, joka tulee vaikka tästä riittävän, vaan käydään sitä väärin, jos tarvii.
Siis se on vaan kestää 100 vuotta. Se on muutenkin hyvä, mutta se on tosiaan
Jotain haastavaa, tai ainakin mulle ei käppäisi. Jolla on eriytettynä noin toiminnot. Niin esittää mutta tosiaan sen minusta näin on aina töissä. Mä oon käytännössä käännöllä sieltä aikoon. Voi kokeilla, jos asioista. Se viedään, että jos ei vaiheessa sen voisi Niin, tässä ei se voisi saada näyttämään.
Well, I actually one of the good points we have heard the things that explain in any sort of way that so it's just because they're talking about the framework or they're talking about national climate goals and how they're thinking in different terms. It was just a feeling that we're discussing this thing, you're discussing that thing. And on the face of it, we're discussing the same thing, but all of them. I mean, that's sometimes frustrating. I understand one topic. I should have talked more, but I will see. Sure. Oh yeah. No, but I didn't mean to talk about the theory. It's just that I
particular problem. It's like one weekend, and you're going to present a large group fair. The fair What about your wife? I have to think of something. You have to do it was basically about I mean, not it's not to the National Museum or something, but I mean, it's that really. Yours is very
Hej Anna.
Mä luulen, että sitä ei varmaan käydä semmoisen se on täällä. Pitääkö sitä kirjaa tekee erityisesti menipuoliksi? Koko keskustaan nyt meni.
Linna.
Tuolla pelalla. So, okay, then we're getting started again after hearing these three interesting and thematically very variable presentations regarding different topics ready to green or eco-socialist ideas. We'll move forward to the panel, and we are joined, apart from the speakers, we're joined by two members of the Left Alliance Environmental Working Group or something. Yes, that sounds like an official name for the group. Elina Turunen and Minna Sumelius. And first, there will be time for questions and answers, more interactive discussion if you like. But first, I would like to ask Elina and Minna to give some comments and impressions on these three presentations we just heard. Anything which struck you as important or ideas worth developing or whatever, and you're free to use 5 to 10 minutes to comment on these presentations.
Thanks. So my name is Elina, and I'm not at the moment aware of the climate negotiations details, but I used to be more active in the climate campaign like end of 90s, beginning of 2000. But I thank you for the presentation. I think they were very rich and enjoyed listening to them a lot. I start with Rikard's presentation. I think it was very nicely put, the capitalist barriers of the transformation, or what was it called? It is very, especially the spatial temporal fixes. I would like to elaborate more on that. Maybe you have more on that in the book as well. But it's not the point that I've talked a lot, and I think it's very important aspect in when we think of building a movement and building an energy network that will be, not centralized. And from Andreas' speech, I picked up the comment on the civil society that's been asked to celebrate the baby steps in negotiations, and I can recognize this as well from the Finnish context, as I don't remember which year's negotiations it was, but I really couldn't tell from the NGO's press release after the COP or COP meeting what was the result. And it struck me, and, because it was, of course, given maybe towards the politicians or negotiators, and not the people. But then we can ask, so where are the people gonna get the information? What's happening? And also it's very nice to hear that Greenpeace has launched the Paris campaign with solves, because it's also a question that the NGOs have not touched at all. I think we've been sometimes asking our environmental NGOs to talk about, say, employment, and if they have any suggestions on that, but it's like non-existent until now. And on Shora's, I just came to think of one detail, perhaps, about the droughts and the wheat price. So maybe one thing that the left parties could concentrate a bit more is the financialization of everything, as also the wheat price and the weather derivatives and things like that. Things are put on the market. And also the opening of the borders and depth to south questions got me thinking of the coalitions of different movements, that maybe if we have the free movement people and then some environmental development people, and they could collaborate a bit more. But the first ones.
Okay, thank you. My name is Minna Somelius. Nice to meet you. And as told, I'm a member of the Left Alliance's Environment Working Group, and I have my background as an activist in Greenpeace and the Finnish Nature Conservation Association. And my view on these things is mostly practical, so I also will not give you a total analysis of the politics. I more relate to these questions as a practical activist. But the things that struck me in these performances were, for example, Rikard, I also read your article in the book, and I sort of liked very much that your approach was also quite practical and at the same time theoretical and practical, and it sort of gave, I felt that I could get a grip of these things, sort of, for example, this idea of the perfect storm, it describes for me pretty well the most important problem as a leftist who is concerned about climate, that the person who suffer most are the persons who sort of do not get
the least responsibility.
Are the responsible. Yeah, thanks. And this is thing that frustrates me every day. And then you talk about timing, wrong timing. This view of, or this thing with Naomi Klein, and also like the neoliberalism is the sort of worst possible version of capitalism to encounter climate change. And this also inspires me quite much, because I don't see that we can really fight climate change without changing the version of economical systems we deal with right now. And then actually you and Andreas, did I say it right? Okay, yeah, great. What really actually I became really inspired with was you were really talking a lot about jobs and work, and that's actually a thing that we also in the Left Alliance, we talk a lot about work, also concerning climate change, because and I see that as the main problem inside the Finnish left movement. The struggle, sort of, we have two, the red and the green have not totally met themselves. And the reason is jobs. Because, well, our political agenda, the official political agenda in our party is that we like really genuinely green, red-green, but the people in the vast Finland, you know, the NGO people in our party do not share this totally. Like, there are still these old perceptions that there is the union people and then there's the young liberal green people who come and ruin the party for the. And this is like totally wrong aspect for me and also for our environmental group, because the main thing about climate change and left politics about climate change is that people and environment have the same, exactly the same enemy, and that is capitalism. And that is just the main thing, and you cannot escape it, and it's not worthwhile to push environment and the trade unions, I mean the labor unions, sorry, small mistake, in the different sides, because it's sort of looking the wrong way. And we have actually made also some kind of practical solutions for the working life, where, for example, came out with this idea of 6-hour working day and 30-hour working week, which would distribute work more equally, and sort of it would give more work, even if the work is concentrated on different fields than nowadays. And of course, we also, that is sort of our own vision, but of course we also do, of course, want to promote green jobs and community work, like household work and sort of. Okay, well, anyway, not economy-driven society, more people-driven society in terms of working life. And yes, we have these solutions, and I would just like to for the Finnish left movement to combine the battle against climate change and battle against global capitalism. It's one fight, and right now we are facing, like, working life in Finland is in great debate because of the horrible cuts that our government is doing, but it's sort of, and we do not, I don't think that we have right now a very strong climate movement right now, because the Finnish, especially leftist green movement, has vanished, because we are sort of looking very strictly to questions regarding work and social security, and we do not understand that this is the same debate. But anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you. It really seems that something which appears to arouse a lot of interest in these presentations is Andreas's idea of climate jobs, and especially the description of events in Norway actually having climate movements with something of a left identity, making alliances with trade unions, which, I mean, very frankly, it sounds quite utopia to us. And I mean, I think it would be interesting to hear something more about practically like experiences of practically building that alliance, and maybe some ideas from other panelists of possible steps forward. Because at least for my part, I would argue that not having the trade unions on board in these kinds of supposed mass movements is a serious problem for building anything which can shift social power within a country like any of these Nordic countries. So I give the mic to Andreas first.
Thanks, Teppo. Those are good questions, and I'm going to throw a bit of questions back to you here, because I think this is an opportunity for a dialogue, really, also. But I think there's two things that could be worth saying. First of all, the initiative of climate jobs itself did not originate from the politically organized left. I've been a socialist for 22 years, and I've been working in party politics for many, many years. And I still have my sympathies, and I know where I vote and so on. But I think it was a good idea, and I think that climate jobs in many countries have started not as a party political project in itself, but rather as either academics. In South Africa, it was an alternative information center, and I think in Britain, I think it originated out of the campaign against climate change. So I think it's important that even though you might have a very political preference, I think if you have some other hat in which to start it off, I think that's an advantage. And I think also for one simple reason also, which is that, and I think I said this in the first Bridge to the Future conference, if the politicians and political parties had understood the gravity of climate change, there would be no need for climate movements. So we have to start from the premise that even though leftist parties and green parties are much better than neoliberal Tory parties, but politics as a whole has failed to address climate change as the problem it is. And I think this is something that ordinary people also, at least in national polls, like in Norway, like 60% consistently say that Norwegian politicians are not doing enough to combat climate change. I think that even people who might be on a denialist fringe in one sense, that they think that, well, this is just too big to handle, they might at the very same time feel that something should have been done that was much bigger. And that feeling that something should have been done that's much bigger is easier, I think, sometimes to mobilize, but if you don't come from any political parties from the start. And the second question is, I completely agree with you, Teppo, about the trade unions. I think that any climate or green jobs project that doesn't at least have a foothold in the trade union movement or the labor movement, doesn't get off the ground. I think many times people in Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, they will understand and they will like the idea of climate jobs very rapidly. But if we cannot find at least one shop steward or one union or somebody who will kind of dedicate part of their time in order to do it, you won't get started, basically. So in Norway, we were fortunate enough that there's a kind of a regional autonomy to the trade unions, so that we could approach, for instance, something. I knew some good guys in Oslo, trade union confederation. I went to their office. I knocked on their door and I said, I have this idea, and they liked the idea, and it started rolling. And now there's 4 national unions. And when we launched this book, Bridge to the Future, there was 4 national union leaders, at the launch of that book. That doesn't mean that there's a great number of people in the unions working in that, but if you get some representative who understands it doesn't have to take a lot of time. So I think there's a combination of taking the initiative outside of the party political sphere on the one hand and approaching the best part of the trade union movement on the other. And you have to figure out that for yourself. Who is that in Finland? I have no idea. I know in Sweden we've had discussions about it earlier. Maybe there's less regional autonomy for some of the unions in Sweden than in Norway, and so on. But there are also unions like the transport or the building workers. Maybe that has made some initiative. So it's just a question of getting started, I think. Yeah. Sorry for being long.
you want to comment? Okay.
On this topic? Well, I can give you a short report from Sweden. There is actually no campaign of this kind in Sweden, but there are individuals within the trade union movement, as you mentioned. There's a guy working at Volvo, for instance, who's been writing a book on how to. Would it be possible to use the production capacity that is, of course, enormous in the Volvo factory in Göteborg to do something good? Instead, to do like wind turbines, to do railway cars or something like that, because there was this huge crisis in 2008 when big number of people were being dismissed and so on because of the global crisis, and then I started to think about what is actually what is a factory like Volvo. It's not that you have to make cars there, really. I mean, there's these machines and the halls, but also the people working there. And of course, they feel very threatened about talks of transformation or transition away from like the fossil cars and diesel cars and so on. So how could you I think the thought behind it is quite similar to this campaign. And how could you actually use these people and this capacity, but to do something good instead of? But otherwise, I think the trade union movement in Sweden is more centralized, perhaps, and I was a bit involved in trying to get them on board in climate initiatives back in 2007 or something like that, and we didn't get very much support. But on an individual level, there are people in transport. You mentioned they have actually put out a book. Transport is, of course, also very, very vulnerable in a sense in a transition. People driving lorries and so on. But there is an amount of concern, but so far nothing very much has come out from the trade union movement.
Any comments from you?
Well, just shortly, as I already told earlier, I think in Finland we have this huge gap between the trade unions and the environmental movement. There's like the same people might be members of both, but they do not realize that it could be even possibly the same movement, and that's the biggest problem we have, I think. And when you told that it's really crucial that we would have like some representatives in the trade unions of climate thinking in Finland, like I was just thinking that I do not like really remember any name that I would really feel that would really be concerned about climate change. And I really like this is really important thing, but in Finland it hasn't really even started yet, the cooperation, so it should start now. And like we in the Left Alliance, we really have to understand the emphasis of this, and in the like all the areas in Finland, we have to do the work to make people understand that labor and climate are not in war with each other. There's a question. Should we put the mic or?
Just shortly, I think there's been this just transition idea debated by some few maybe people in the unions first, but and then again maybe the big leaders are not on board tackling climate change, but I think SAK, one of the main unions, had their negotiator in the climate negotiations last year, so they are at least following the debates. And then maybe one thing is how could we talk to the members of the unions? It's, maybe the people in Turku Harbour, they wouldn't mind building wind turbines instead of these cruise boats, big cruise boats. I think they said that sometime. Don't care.
Good. Okay, so there was a question from the audience.
You're allowed to do this kind of thing, if I may.
Yeah.
I'm crossing. Do you say cross in English? Maybe you say. Right. Okay. With Minna's opinion about that, it's already it's about to start because as she left, added you're right. There's in SAK, there's a big person working with these issues. In actually every major union, there's a person working with these issues, and in like white collar STTK, which is like a white collar union. I haven't been here, so I don't know what you've been talking about, but like in the white collar union, Ralf Sund, who's our ex-party secretary, he's not here, said that most of his working time is close to these traditional issues. Like if the same person is responsible for 100,000 members, not 100,000, but anyway, how many members, right, and then added to that is you have this climate change stuff with side of your job, so it's kind of, this is not complete negative of what you said, but I said that it's going on, but it hasn't
Yeah, you're right, and that there is people who is responsible of this, but what I'm worried is that still the climate thinking does not show anywhere out. Like there is no media of trade unions having their hands up for climate. That's the problem, that it's sort of deliberately pushed down. And it's because we don't want to tackle this thing. That's what I think, at least.
Can I shortly? Yeah. Maybe this is more of a problem of kind of like the ones who devalue trade unions. It's not the issue of climate change, but trade unions are, they're not fashionable. But they're, of course,
that's true also.
I wanted to comment precisely on that, and it's interesting what you say about there are people working in most unions some way or another with environmental. They might go to the climate negotiations, they might be responsible for some aspects, but these are people who are very much hidden from view, and they're certainly not part of the media discussions. And I'll tell you, even in Norway, where we have this conference for a year, it's been a struggle to get into the media, but it's also been a little bit of a struggle to stay out of the media. Because actually, we have been quite conscious that we want to build, step by step, this alliance first, before we explode things in the media. And I think that the trade unions are very different from environmental organizations. The Greenpeace and other people, they're expert and they want to go to the media. If they don't go to the media at the same time that they have an action, it's a little bit of a failed action. But the trade unions don't work that way. Very often they discuss and they talk and then it'll take a year and another year and then something happens. And they might come in the media and they might not be in the media. That's not the main point. I think that the main question is really, where is there coalition potential in Finland? I mean, which of those people going to the summits? I mean, one of the guys who's working with our alliance he's gone for summits for like 15 years. I never knew him until 2 years ago. But he was a little bit fed up by just going to these conferences. He's just going there, taking notes and so on. And it was part of his job. But now we present him with this project. We want to do this together. And he contributed writing a little report saying how we could create 50,000 jobs in offshore wind. And he was, main part of that. He was not even an elected representative. He was just an expert working with one of the unions. And there might be others like that. So I think it's really important to not think that those people, are they there? Do they already think that we can do it? But rather present them with the idea, what do you think about making an alliance for climate jobs? And then you'll find out whether those people are there or not. And just finally, the other thing is that I think it's important to do this kind of thing, which is kind of just knocking on people's door and talking to them, and combining it with something that is broad and open. So I want to pose a question back to you. Is there any common mobilization in Finland, like for People's Climate March, for Up to Paris? Is there any coalition? Churches, forget about unions. Because if there are, I'll bet that those coalitions, you put the idea of green jobs or climate jobs to them, and they will like it. Remember that in New York last year, there was like 400,000 people demonstrating. There was just 10,000 trade unionists on the march. So there's union members are very much a minority, but the political appeal of green jobs, as you suggested, I think, is so interesting that everybody likes it. So the thing is really, putting the idea first, and then see to what extent does it catch on. I think that's important. Yeah, but the question is really about, of course, comment and also, but I truly mean the question about how is the movement, the climate movement in Finland shaping?
Did you want to respond to that?
No, thanks.
I can come back.
I think the Finnish climate movement has been very nice towards politicians and people. There are this, I think, climate law, and then this 350.org and different things like that. But when you said that these people working at the meetings and negotiations, they might be like maybe a bit bored with that. They don't get anything done. It's the same problem with the movements, because as these our experts in NGOs, the talk is quite technocratic, and it's not easy to follow with the work, and that's one thing why there are so few people working with the negotiations, since you have to put your all the time just to find the details, and just to find some like ideas, as you said, to build something around them. I think it's a good idea.
Well, I just wanted to comment on this also from a party political perspective, because I think Andreas, you had a valid point there that for movement building, it's not always the best way to start and to say that you come from the left party or from another party, because it got branded more narrow in the movement in a sense. But I think I'm also a member of the left party in Sweden, and we, as the role of the party is sometimes actually to renew the ideological debate, perhaps, and to make policies and make politics. And I'm sure you have too a lot of members in the trade union movement, which are often active members who can actually carry a movement. But for them to take that step, it matters what is the party stance on these issues. And if green issues, if climate issues is not very high up on the agenda in the left party, I think that will actually have a kind of disincentivize people to involved in these questions also as union activists. And therefore I just want to mention also this is a brand new report that has been written by a committee within the left party in Sweden, Politics for a Red-Green Transition, and where the focus is really to make to make sense of our economic policies and our traditional class policies and so on, and combine them with this need for green jobs, but also for reduction of working hours that you mentioned, and to have this justice perspective throughout, because the left party has had a good environmental policies for many years, for 20 or 30 years, even more. but it's a kind of a policy area on its own. And then there's the industrial policy area and how to create more jobs and so on. So what we try to make is to actually to integrate this green and the need for climate transition into the heavy central areas of party politics for a left party. So we try to do that, and we hope that it will create a great debate within the left party in Sweden, and it will be hopefully the main issue on the next on the party congress in the spring next year.
I'd like to comment on that, if it's okay. I also, like what I didn't say in my last comment, was that I also think that, a political party should be a part of the vast citizens movement, but it also, for me, it has also its own task. And that is like, at least I can say for Finnish political party field, I think the Left Alliance has a really important job. It's the only party that can really tackle or try to control growth and has the mandate for it. For example, our Green Party is very diverse. There is like very, very right-wing opinions also, and then there is some left-wing thinkers also, but I do not think that they can sort of give any real ideas to control growth, because they are so arguing that they are debating the thing so differently. And it's really like, who else, if not the left-wing party in our society, will give means to control growth? Not the Social Democrats in Finland, because they really don't accomplish anything for my viewpoint. But anyway, yeah, growth. And we also should make more clear in our own field, in our own party, within the people in our own party, what do we think about growth? Because it's quite unclear right now. We just say that we want to control it, and we want to put the people and environment first, and then the growth sort of follows that, and or people and environment make the sort of lines that control the growth. And we need to be more strict, like which amount of growth we accept, and or which direction do we take? Do we start to discuss about degrowth, or do we just want to control the growth in some really unclear ways? That's what I would like to know.
Okay, now there are lots of themes emerging, so I try to now, in this point, sum up a little. We still have time remaining, but to sort of keep on track what we're talking about, and then pass the mic again to you. Now, one issue which emerges now is the matter of what is the relative weight of environmental policy within left parties. Like Rikard was saying, that the left parties have always had good or excellent environmental policies, but they don't get that kind of real political weight when it comes to actual decision making. And I would argue that quite a few people in Finland have the same feeling, that there's nothing wrong with the environmental policy of the left party as such, but then you might get into debates on where does it actually reflect, or how does it actually reflect itself in sort of day-to-day power politics. Now, second, there seems to be emerging the question of the role of political parties. Now, Andreas is being very cynical about political parties, as I understand your points, and in saying that, and you're almost saying that initiatives cannot come from political parties because people in general don't trust them. And And anyway, we should be talking in the context of political parties. Political parties do have a role, and they have to be in some kind of relation between more perhaps spontaneous and perhaps more non-hierarchical civil movements or civil society movements. But they still have a role. What we should be trying to figure is how does the interplay between political parties and these movements ideally function. So I guess these would be the sort of like two themes related to left politics, which you seem to have kind of cast onto this discussion, and it would be nice to have something like a further elaboration on either of the themes from the panelists. So, everyone saying something.
Thanks. But the environmental politics of policy initiatives of the left party the problems is that there are no initiatives, and it's part of the bigger problem of our party construction, culture of working with its members and as well with the movement. So I think maybe in Finland the Green Party has been better in taking up initiatives and bringing them forward. Yeah, if you can use work with the movements, I guess it's kind of win-win for both.
It came too early to me, but yeah, I already talked long about what is the sort of job of the party, but yeah, I also agree with Elina that we sort of our structure in our party does not support that much initiatives, and that is a problem that we have to face. We should be like, for example, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. We as a environmental working group, we have a lot of very good people there. There's like people from the environment ministry, several of them. Then there's several activists. So we sort of we have really good dynamics there, and I think we make a lot of good things there, and then we are not allowed to say them, or like we are not allowed to give any say anything publicly without the party chair people to say yes to them. So that's our problem, that we cannot, like, the information is sort of, or the hierarchy is complicated. But if we don't give a lot of initiatives, it doesn't mean that we are not good in our climate things, because for our party programs are quite advanced. For example, our climate or our emissions targets are that we reduce 40% 2020 and 98% on 2050. So these figures are like in the level of NGOs. And so we don't have a problem with this. We don't have a problem with our politics. We just have a problem with our democracy. Yeah. And that is a big problem. But anyway, we should not like feel ashamed next to the Green Party, for example, in Finland. We just need to build our structure in a way that we can use it in a good way.
I'll give a few comments from my perspective. I think you're right, Teppo, that the relative weight of environmental issues has not been, very strong in the left party in Sweden for quite a long time, and it has actually been a kind of a right-left thing within the party. Like in the 90s, it was we were dealing more with green issues, but that was seen as something of a right turn And then the left took power in the party and stopped talking about environmental issues very much. So now also that's one of the things that we try to do with this report and this committee, to actually make it very obvious that this is a leftist perspective. We quote a lot of Marx. We have radical theories. We say that we really criticize capitalism. So try to make it, in a sense, also cool among the leftists to realize that environmental issues is about confronting economic power and not about being nice and having and drinking tea and whatever are the prejudices about the environmental movement to really make this. We're not having a green program here. We're having a red-green program, a confrontative Marxist socialist. I mean, just to use the word. And we are helped actually right now because our party chairman, Jonas Sjöstedt, is very interested in this question. So he's part of actually launching this report now, and we had a meeting the other week in Göteborg, and people came there and listened to what we had to say about ecological economics and so on. I think that's important to actually try with all means possible to make this crucial question to get higher up on the agenda. And when just short about the roles of a party to the movement, and I think since 1 year I'm part of the council in Stockholm, and we have this movement for divestment. I think it's also connected to 350.org, and they have been lobbying us to divest the funds from it. I mean, large city like Stockholm have some investments in funds which include fossil companies, energy companies, oil companies, etc., and to divest them, to invest them in other places. So they've been lobbying on us. And while our coalition partners have been very reluctant actually to listen to the demands of this movement, because they are somehow afraid to accept demands from movements, because then they would feel like hijacked. I think they used actually a Green Party member used that word. So then we had to listen to like any kind of demands from any kind of movement. While we have been trying really to work with this movement, and it feels a bit strange sometimes to like be part of the movement lobbying against yourself, but still we have really tried to listen to the movement and bring their demands into the political processes, and we haven't succeeded yet, I'm afraid to say, but we have tried very hard. That could be an ideal way of collaboration, I think.
Well, this is turning into a very interesting discussion. I'm glad this question of a party versus movement came up, and the relationship between it. I think I would like to retract my comment about saying that it's because of people don't trust politicians. If you can delete that from the video, that would be great. But I want to distinguish between what I think politically here and what is the situation on the ground. In principle, there's nothing wrong at all with political parties taking initiatives to build coalitions. And for example, in Bergen, the second biggest city of Norway, the divestment campaign, as you mentioned, was started as a coalition from different parties of the left in Norway. The Socialist Left Party, the Red Party, and I think some of the Green Party was there, and the Friends of the Earth and so on. So there's nothing here in principle. In fact, on a longer term basis, I mean, my party background is even a Leninist, unpopular background, but I have nothing against the idea of parties being expressive, and especially when you turn to questions of power and organizing things. Absolutely, I'm with that. And I even remember that old saying about parliamentary cretinism, the idea that everything needs to happen through parliament, which is an old Lenin phrase. But the fact, I think, if we take climate change as our issue, and if we accept, as I think we all do here in the panel, that there's something big needs to happen in order to have big movements change things. I think there's no disagreement upon that. Who are in fact the initiators? Who is starting? Where are the first seeds being sown? Actually, and you mentioned it, 350.org. That was a big thing. I mean, the demonstration in Norway last year was this group of people not aligned to any organization, neither NGOs nor political parties. They summoned 1,000 people outside of Parliament. And I think if that's the case in many countries, and I think it is, then it means that maybe some of those socialist left members that you have in unions or different, maybe they would have to take the initiative as part of a movement, not out of principle, but simply because things as they are. And then I think that the work that you're doing, Rikard, in terms of getting a better principled position of the left party, there's all kinds of need for that as well. But my kind of, my main thing is that if there isn't a strategy to mobilize people, and if there isn't an actual first attempt to knock on anybody's doors to make things happen, then I wouldn't be happy about it. So I've kind of chosen that because I think that in Norway, at least, there's many formal good politics. In the Socialist Left Party or the Red Party, they have made some good policy plans. But it's like, it's good policy plans. It's just there. And I'm just so afraid of being here in 20 years and saying that, well, we had the right policy plans all along. We knew it, but we didn't know how to put it out to practice. And I think that's where I return. We need to find some way of building movement, because only if there's movements can you have that kind of interaction that you're talking about, Rikard, between demands from the street or demands from the movement, and then you can do it in a municipal level and so on. Without movements, the left is nothing. So that's it's not a cynicalism about the parties on my hand, as much as just sticking my finger to the ground and saying where to begin.
Are you got another question?
Any other? Would anyone want to comment further on the issues brought up here? I mean, I was especially interested in Andreas posing very directly the question that where can the initiative be? I mean, if it has to be somewhere, where is it in a particular society and particular social setting? But free to comment on anything.
I would say the initiative can only be in cooperation, otherwise it wouldn't be possible. Climate change, unfortunately, is a question that does not very easily get people on streets, because people are not angry to the climate. In Finland, I think people need to be sort of angry to somebody to get really mobilized. And that's what has been happening right now when our government has been doing a lot of cuts on the social security and working terms and everything. So there's been a vast movement, but I don't see a very easy way for people realizing that the reasons to climate change is in politics and sort of being angry for that. And of course it's partly because some politicians say it's not like that. Right-wing people say that it's in all the people in their personas that has the solution. But anyway, cooperation, party politics or party politicians making cooperation with NGOs and trade unions and everybody. So that's the only way to do it, to me.
Okay, we've been talking lots about organizing, and this discussion on organizing has been somewhat based on the assumption that policy programs are correct, as many of us have said in this discussion already. But let me still pose this question to you in reverse. What seem to be such issues which need to be corrected in left environmental programs? What seems to be lacking in left environmental policies? To me, there was something really interesting in Rikard's presentation, which was the notion on decentralization as the necessity of decentralization as a barrier to transition to sustainability. And that's made me wonder that, are we paying sufficient attention to the claim of decentralization of energy, for example, in left policies? But this is just one example.
If I can begin, when I was heard that I will be coming here, I was thinking of what are the traps of climate policy. That I thought one is technology, in the sense that maybe you can't build enough technology in the time we have, and otherwise, or in other way, that we are too technocratic in our means by being just experts on climate change, those who work with it. The second one was the market mechanisms, that we can't solve climate issues by using carbon trade or CDM or whatever. And third one perhaps the limits of resources. And one of the things that we could talk more in the left is what are the different options to build economies, and we don't really have that in our programs. If we are not doing it on the market, what are the ways? And perhaps we could also combine here some initiatives that come from Southern Europe during the crisis, and different kind of co-ops and common resources, and different initiatives of solidarity economy. That's what we don't really have.
Decentralizing energy is quite important to the Left Alliance. Actually, it's in our several party programs stating that the production of energy and food is organized in a decentralized and environmentally friendly way, and the degree of self-sufficiency rises through that. That is our goal. And we want to connect the various small-scale energy producers so that they can potentially produce energy for the main grid. So yeah, we have quite good goals and targets, but we again lack some kind of practical initiatives to do these things.
Well, I think this is you can tackle this question from several angles, but I think one thing about at least the experience we from the Left Party in Sweden is that we had a good environmental policies which are very close to what the major environmental organizations think, and of course we want to hook up with them and be their allies in the parliament. And since these organizations are not socialist or particularly critical towards the economy, I think that has been a kind of a barrier for us developing really good policies on these areas. Because we don't want to, if the Greenpeace and Swedish Society for Nature Conservation and WWF are rather positive to carbon trading, we haven't wanted to make a conflict out of that. Yeah. If they are critical, or at least particularly Greenpeace is very, very anti-nuclear, and in Sweden that following the policies of Greenpeace on these issues would raise emissions in the short term. We have to at least think about that. It's a difficult question. There are the focus on green consumerism and the individual choice, etc., that we don't want to confront really, and we try to do that now and we really politicize these questions and talk about structured measures and politics and so on, instead of the tendency to individualize these problems. But to do that, you also have to confront, in a way, the mainstream environmental movements, which is difficult. There are other examples as well.
Okay, I want to make a comment on decentralization, and I'll then return to the question of growth that you were mentioning, because I think this is an important issue. Generally, I wrote a chapter here in the book which you should read about decentralization as an obstacle and as a capitalist barrier, so you should read that as well. I'm generally, sympathetic to the idea of decentralization and local control and so on. But if we are to, believe Jacobs and delusions, the energy researchers you were also mentioning, and if we're going to move the entire planet to wind, water, and sun within the next 40 years or so, I mean that's 2 million people signed the Ava statement in the run-up to the New York demonstration. What was that? It was 100% clean energy. That was the demand. So that's where the movement is. If we're going to do that, yes, there's going to be some decentralized energy level, but there's also going to be some massive industrialized, centralized investments in big grids. I mean, in Norway we have hydropower. And some of it are local waterfalls and so on. But Germany and Denmark, many want to have a new energy, renewable energy Europe. There would need to be big grid, big cables going from wind power, so in some instances you're going to have decentralization. In other instances you're going to have centralization. The main issue for me is democratic control. I mean, that's the old Marx quote, democratic control over the means of production. Whether that is local, regional, or central is, I think, secondary to the question of democratic control. And I just want to mention that in addition to climate jobs campaigns around the world, the other radical wing of the trade union movements international is what's called the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, which has affiliates in around 14 different countries. And those are very much connected to the remunicipalization of communal energy. In Germany, this could go all over the place. A lot of unions there, but also in Canada and so forth. And I think this, in parentheses, this is why the left is important, because whereas the Green Party will oscillate between pro-market and anti-market solutions, the left generally understands this thing about the democratic control as opposed to the market in a much greater extent. And I think this logic applies to the question of growth as well, because growth, if it's just an abstract thing, it turns very difficult. But in Norway, it's very easy. We're going to degrow oil, and we're going to grow other stuff. It's so easy. So and what does that mean? Well, you're going to have to cut down on the revenues, and you're going to cut down on what we're already putting all our money into, and then we're going to have farming, and then we're going to have fishery, and then we're going to have transport, and then we're going to have windmills. And that, I think that's the way to put it in a way that normal people will understand it. We're going to stop doing one thing, and we're going to do another thing, because we're going to save the planet. So I think we have to kind of pick apart these growth, degrowth things, decentralization, and say that we're going to assume popular democratic control over the means of production of this planet in order to make it habitable for us. That's just
yeah. Now that it seems to be getting a bit heated and even getting an element of controversy here, as usual, the time is right on that minute. It's 5 p.m. and I'm afraid we have to close this discussion. They hope there have been different inputs of ideas which people can gain from and contemplate further, both regarding red-green policies and organizing for social change and organizing for sustainable change, and also organizing in the spirit of cooperation. It's unfortunate that we didn't have time to discuss the main issue brought up by Shora, which is also a matter of cooperation, the issue of should we see the movement for sustainability and the refugee solidarity movement as somehow interlinked, as elements or aspects of a single movement. And I think that's something in addition to these elements of cooperation between the environmental movement and the trade union movement, we should be contemplating very seriously. But as said, our time is up. Thank you everyone for attending, and especially to our speakers for taking part, and for the first two speakers for coming all this way to give this speech. Thank you.